All right, so welcome to this DevOps True North webinar. I'm with PolSource, CodeScan and Copado. Let's do some introductions. I'm the ugly one at the end, so I'm Martin O'Connell. I'm one of the senior technical architects for EMEA. I've worked at PolSource for a couple of years. I've been on the Salesforce platform for the last 11 years. Ben, over to you.
Hi, I'm Ben Clinton. I'm the CTO of CodeScan. Yeah, thanks for introducing me, Martin, and over to you, Andrew.
Hey, delighted to be with you guys. I'm Andrew Davis from Copado, also author of Mastering Salesforce DevOps. Delighted to be here with you guys.
Thanks, Ben and Andrew. Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to have a quick look at the state of delivery of delivering on the Salesforce platform. We're going to have a look at approaches to DevOps. I'm going to do an end-to-end demo of Copado and CodeScan on how that gets into a DevOps process. We're going to do a bit more of a deep dive into, or Ben will then do a bit more of a deep dive into CodeScan. Andrew's going to show you some really cool stuff that came out today on the Copado to do with DevOps 360. Then we're going to discuss a few topics, and we're also going to have a Q&A session towards the end. There is a panel on the webinar for you to Q&A, which we will try and answer during the meeting. Any questions that we are unable to answer, because we're going to run out of time, I suspect, we'll try and answer them offline. So I hope that's okay with you guys. Okay, so building on the Salesforce platform. Typical project could be 70 or 80% of configuration, and configuration will be things like custom objects, custom fields, process builder, workflow, and flow. But 20–30% of that of the project is going to be code, and this is where things start to have an issue, particularly on large projects or complex projects. If your code base is not at the right standard, you're not adopting all the Salesforce best practices, potentially you will run into problems around about UAT or even worst case production. Lots of people or lots of companies are deploying using chain sets, which is fine for small projects. But as those projects get more complicated and complex, that starts to have issues. The Salesforce doesn't come with version control out of the box. You have to implement your own. So that'll be another thing that I see quite often as well. And also where companies have actually digressed from chain sets and they've actually built their own let me call it deployment process, because it may not cover all the facets of a typical DevOps process. So yeah, that's that one. DevOps. What is DevOps? So DevOps is a combination of things. Primarily, it's the development team that you've got. You've got your operations team. And you've got your QA team, and the idea is for those people or those teams to work in harmony, to be able to deliver, let's call it value add or functionality that you want to push into production. And the idea is to have that on a continuous basis with high quality code. And high quality code, it's working and understanding what the governor limits are within Salesforce. It's looking at, for instance, Apex best practices to do that. Okay. So what's a better approach? So something we do quite often whenever we're looking at, or people contact us, people contact PolSource, is that we do an initial review of that org, and it will be, the first thing we normally do is to run something like CodeScan, which we'll dive to in a minute, which gives us a good level of understanding and maturity of where that org is in terms of code quality. It's almost like the foundation, when you're building a house, the foundations of that house need to be good, otherwise you'll end up building a house that's likely to fall down a bit later on or have issues. PolSource, we have many really experienced TAs working for us in EMEA, in Poland, and AMER that will take you through this process. I've mentioned about the static code analysis tool that we use as CodeScan. CodeScan runs industry standard tools against both Apex, Visualforce, Lightning Web Components, and we'll show you, well, Ben will show you the actual dashboards for that a bit later on. And then finally, understanding the actual deployment process or DevOps process. So, you know, to quote someone else on this call, the nirvana of DevOps is for, you know, it's that you're continuously delivering production quality code. And I did read somewhere that companies like Amazon, if you're measuring your deployments in every couple of weeks, well, Amazon are actually measuring the number of deployments they're doing in the thousands every day. So that's really where the nirvana of DevOps is. Skip on to the next one. So what are the current challenges that we face? So first of all, visibility and governance. So what are the metrics on your delivery? So if you've got a user story, you've got some code, how long is that code taking to go through your deployment cycle? You know, you could be measuring this in months. If you're using a waterfall approach, it could be hours, it could be days. So having some metrics and analytics about that would be good. What is your code quality? I've mentioned the word here, technical debt. So every time that you write code, you're creating technical debt. If that code is not sufficient quality, benchmarked against industry standard rules, you could actually end up finding issues. You know, I've mentioned already that you could find those issues both in UAT and QA, but the ideal scenario is that the code quality is actually found at the point that so the code quality is fixed at the point that you're writing it. So you're only deploying good quality code. Collaboration, you know, DevOps is all about teams working together and not in silos. There is no point creating a package, if you like, that the development team will create and then throw that over the wall to the ops team, who will very, very quickly find issues with it and throw it back again. So DevOps is all about working together as a team to actually push that through.
Can I make one note about silos? That also applies to the release management team. So if you have all your developers pushing everything onto one release manager, and the release managers are having to send things back and say, hey, where's the missing metadata? That's a silo, right? Even though we don't have sysadmins and so forth.
Yeah, I think one of the scenarios I was going to go through with Copado, we'll touch on that as well. But yeah, very, very important point. Delivering change. So obviously the company is going to want that functionality delivered as quickly as possible. So if we can automate as much of this as possible, that's all for better. Salesforce is sort of, well, it's not the only platform, but it has a few gotchas. So one of them, so metadata is the code and configuration, and they may well be in XML files. But as part of your story, you may also deploying data. So you have to think about that as well. So a lot of tools wouldn't support data by themselves. And having sat through 1 o'clock on a Saturday morning many times on a very complex project, going through many iterations of a deployment because things have been missing. So it's important to actually try and get the thing to deploy first time, and repeatable deployments. Okay, so let me give you a quick demo. I mean quick, probably 15 minutes. To do this properly would take a few hours, so we are constrained by time on this. So let me give you the highlights of where we are. So I'm going to show you, Andrew, can you just confirm that you can see the pipeline screen?
You're looking great.
Great. Okay, so this is Copado pipeline. So what's a pipeline? A pipeline is a connection of all of the orgs meshed together. So starting in the left-hand column, we've got all the developer sandboxes. In the middle, I've got two. I've got UAT, and I've got hotfix, and then on the right, I've got production. Now, obviously, for those who know about DevOps, there's QA, which I'm missing, but for the purposes of this, I'm just trying to make this simple. So the idea here is that we're pushing code, or we're pushing changes, sorry, from left to right, okay? I've got my 4 dev boxes, and you can see these little numbers on here, which I should come back to. But let me show you, if I do configure pipeline, I have something called connection behaviors between these different orgs. So when I go to my user story, it's going to use these connection behaviors for the continuous integration pipeline. So let me explain what this is. Right. So what we have an incoming deployment, right? And the incoming deployment is automated, i.e., Copado is going to do that deployment. I also have something called back promotion. So a lot of DevOps processes, deployment processes, they will have a sandbox, and it will stay open for the life of a release or the entire project. I've seen sandboxes that are 3 or 4 years old, and the problem with that is that the code or the configuration in there is 3 or 4 years out of date. With the Copado Pipeline Manager, what we can do is that we can do back promotion. So every single user story that goes up the tree, that goes left to right, we can also float that back. The back promotion can be automated or scheduled or manual. I've chosen to make all of my dev boxes are going to get updated on a Sunday at midday. Here I've got every single user story that goes from dev to the UAT sandbox is going to be ready for testing. So my QA people can to do that, or indeed if I've got some automated regression testing like Selenium, Provar, there are others. But the actual story will be ready for testing. That will be its status. Copado also has a concept called quality gates. So let me explain what these are. So every single user story that comes through this that's deployed to UAT that has Apex, it has to run Apex test with validation. So the Apex test for this org, I've set that coverage needs to be 75%. So if the user story doesn't have Apex, doesn't have a unit test, and it doesn't have the code coverage, it's going to get rejected. Every single user story within Copado, invisible to the user, when you create that user story and you do a commit, essentially it's getting pushed into version control, which I can show you as well. And what we want as best practice is that we would like the technical lead, every time that there is a user story that requires Apex code, we want him to review the pull request. Also, very importantly, and again, I'll show you this in a bit more detail later, is that every single user story has to run CodeScan on it. Now, I've set on here that user story can have a certain level of issues before it's allowed, and I'm going to show you that one. The particular story that I'm going to show you has what's called, we'll run a compliance check. But if you're say for instance, you're looking at profiles, permissions, if you have like something like modify all data or view all data in there, again, you can actually, if your company says, no, I don't want that set, you can run a compliance check automatically for every user story, and again, it will reject it. I'll duplicate the pull request there for some reason. And I've also said here for simplicity, I've got my QA lead who will do a manual test, and I've already written the script to do this. Okay. Right, so let me jump into my user story. So it's not a very complicated user story. Related to the pipeline, I've got the series of orgs that this pipeline goes through. So CPQ is going to go to UAT and then go through to prod through Copado. And this story, very, very simply, consists of one profile with view all data in it, one layout, I've got a new custom field, and I've got an object called PolSource. So I can submit. I can get that to the pipeline in various ways. So let me just explain. Ready to promote. That will just queue this job up. So you can see on the pipeline, I had some numbers that will be ready to deploy. I could click promote and deploy. So I just say, well, I don't care. I want to deploy it now. But if we're using the continuous delivery model, then all I do is submit, and then all those quality gates that I showed you on the pipeline will automatically run. On the user story itself, I also have, again, this is a unique part of Copado, is I have some deployment tasks. So what I've set up is I've got a manual task which will email the person doing the, in actual fact, it's doing the chatting notification to the person doing the deployment saying, right, you need to disable the sharing calculations, please. Oops. You need to disable sharing calculations. Then I've got an Apex script, which will, once the deployment is done, I'm then going to assign that profile to a user. And then I'm actually going to run, enable the sharing calculations. Deployment tasks can be a few different types. You could just have a manual task and you just say, yeah, I want to do that, or it can consist of data. So you can keep everything related to your user story related to your user story. You don't need any other documentation to go with this. And the whole process, if I've got a manual task, the whole process stops until that manual task is done. And then the tech lead of the QA says, yeah, I'm happy with that, away we go.
Can I just double down on that in terms of that silo between the release managers and the developers and so forth? One of the reasons why Salesforce deployments are often, time consuming and so forth, the developers put together these huge long lists of metadata they need moved and manual steps, and maybe they throw it over the fence to the release managers, and they've got this long checklist, and they've got to spend days, preparing what are the steps. These deployment tasks just allow the developers themselves to say, here are all the exact steps, including anonymous Apex and data deployments and all of that stuff. Whatever you need, it's tied to the user story. So then the whole checklist is automatically generated every time you do a deployment. It's very slick.
Exactly, and I think we've probably all been involved in deployment on a Friday night, thinking, why hasn't this worked? And there's a deployment step missed because it's not been written down here. It's down to the developer to actually do this, and as part of the validation, that step has to be there. So the likelihood of this actually working first time is much, much higher.
And the developer is asleep because they're in another part of the world. And then,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
the three of us have battle scars, and all of us triggering some PTSD when you bring this up, Martin. So be sensitive to Ben and I.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. So let me show you a slightly more interesting, user story. So this one's got code, and this is where we start to bring in CodeScan. So what's this code doing? So we've got a what we've got a layer, custom field, custom object, and we've got a trigger. Please notice that there is no apex test. Okay, so what's going to happen? So you can see down here in the apex code coverage that Copado has recognized that the user story has apex code, and my apex code is currently 0. So, okay, great. So let me submit changes. And it should come back, and you can see all my quality gates it's going to run here, and it should come back almost straight away that I've got no code coverage. Right, okay, fine. Now what do? Well, lucky enough, I have already written a story which has that fixed. So let me show you one with that in. I would mention an old UK TV program called Blue Peter, where they usually mention that a lot, but most people on this call would not get that joke. Okay, so user story 15. I've already run my code coverage, and I've got 100%. I've got my test, which is good. By the way, if you want to run the tests, you can run the test one of two ways. You can either run it through the pipeline, or I can actually run my test here. I can also run my static code analysis here. So what's good? So Motorola, I've got my unit test. I've got 100% coverage. That means I'm good. Yeah, that means I've done everything. I've done everything I need to do. Problem's not quite right, unfortunately. Oops. So, problem is I've got a number of issues with that code. So if we zip over to CodeScan, because my pipelines run this. So this is your first view of CodeScan. And it says, right, okay, I've got 2 critical issues, 2 major issues. Right, so what are they? Right, so I've got a test, and it says no system asserts. Okay, so if your unit test does not have a system assert, it's not a unit test because it's not testing anything. I've also got a very beginner error down here called avoid running SOQL and DML in loops. Basically, if you see that in your code, you're going to start hitting governor limits within Salesforce. I also have 2 other major issues. Okay, another beginner issue that I've got logic in trigger. Okay, your logic should be in another class. And also as part of that, I've got an unused variable. I also have a couple of issues about comments as well. So damn, okay. So Copado will not let me deploy this story because it's not met the the quality gate. So let me show you one that already has.
Hey, Martin, just to pause a little bit to restate, Jonathan had a question. Just to recap, how did you associate the code with the user story? That's the first question.
Yeah.
Do you want to just point out how the code is associated with the user story to sort of reiterate?
Yeah, sorry. So let me go back to the user story. I want to. So what will happen? So let me just go back to this quickly. So what I've got, I'm in my production org. This is my let's call this a governance org, right? And I'm writing the user story, and down here you can see the org credential, and basically what that means is where where are the changes for this, right? Because I'm not making the changes in my governance org, which could be production, or it could be a separate production org. It's in Dev 3. So how do I create my user story and I want to look at it. So if I do commit changes, up comes a grid, okay? So for the purposes of simplicity, okay, I could just go in and say, show me everything that was created on the 10th. Okay, and there's all the stuff that I created on the 10th. And I could go off and tick the ones I want. I could filter by type, I could filter by last modified ID, or I could filter by last date. I can also just start typing in stuff on here as well. So there are many ways of retrieving it. But your selected metadata, if I do recommit files, yeah, so my selected metadata now is all the ones that I've actually chosen from my story. In actual fact, Andrew, I'm really glad that you pointed out. So just to explain some of this stuff. So the commit files would be when you want to create a new user story with some metadata in it. The recommit file will be so here I've got. This is just the metadata headers as it appears from the describe call. And it's literally just bringing the names back, right? If I actually want to bring back, if I've actually subsequently changed one of these files, I could do recommit, okay? And what you'll see on the recommit is I want to recreate the feature branch, and it's very important to remember within Copado that every single user story ends up with its own feature branch and user story feature branch within the with whatever version control system that you're using. I'm currently using Git, but obviously others are available. Something not available with change sets are destructive changes. So I may have something that I've deployed into production I want to get rid of. Again, you can do that all from here. Profiles and permission sets. We could do a webinar for a couple of hours just about that by itself. But you know, lots of companies I deal with don't handle. They actually put profiles and permissions outside of their deployment process and handle them manually. With the way that Copado works, you don't need to do that. You can actually push them in as far as the deployment process. So there's your 4 different Git actions. Does that answer the question, Andrew?
Oh, that's perfect. That's lovely. Yeah. And the one thing, because there's a unit test that's associated with this, if you click run tests on this particular user story, it'll highlight the tests that are added to the metadata there. And just the final question that Jonathan had asked on this is, if their team is already using Jira, how can you know, can they keep using Jira? Do they have to switch to Copado? And I'll answer that just to say that we do have a 2-way synchronization. There's a managed package or an unmanaged package you can install that'll set up a 2-way sync with Jira that allows you to customize which fields are synced and how often the sync runs and so forth. So, Martin, that's all perfect. I didn't mean to to reset the demo too much. I just wanted to make sure people were tracking.
No, that's fine. To be honest, I actually can't see the questions coming in, so please.
I got you.
Yeah, so that's fine. But we will answer as much of these as we can afterwards. Right, so where do we get to? Right, so user story 19. So we looked a little bit at those issues. Yeah, so that's fine. Okay, so user story 19. So let me just point out that I've already deployed this story to production because you can see all of these are green. But let me show you the iterations that I went through to get it there. Okay, so you can see that I went through 5 iterations of trying to get it there to try and get the issues done. Right, the there's a reason why I'm an architect and not a developer. I think that should be fairly obvious. I think I've chosen the right career path now. But on the first one, I ended up with a score of 2. And if I look at that, let me open that in a new window, you can see within that record, it's failed for a number of reasons, and Copado gives it a score, but the actual reason why it's failing is, right, okay, I've got a comment required, okay, which failed first time. The next one was a bit more serious. So comment required. I should have been using the singleton way of doing things as well. Oops, I lost my user story. User story 19. Yeah. And what you can also see within CodeScan, so all of these are linked to CodeScan. Where's that one? Let's go on the latest one. I've got a link to the dashboard in CodeScan. And then CodeScan will also show you those iterations. So I came in, I topped out at 4 bugs, then 1 to 1, and then increased them. So that's to get my code coverage up. Now Ben will go into this a bit more detail, right? But we have this concept called quality gate, which in this particular instance, I've set the quality gate. There's no blocker issues, no critical issues, no major issues. And that means it's passed, which means that I can now deploy this user story successfully. Now, one of the questions may well be, right, does that replace the TA on a project? What CodeScan does, it will take away 70% of the effort of doing code reviews. You know, do you really want to pay, or do you really want a highly certified TA looking at code to say, yeah, you've got comments missing, or would you rather have him looking at your architecture and actually getting the right architecture on your project? I know which one I'd rather have. There are instances where you can't put CodeScan rules in for everything. I've got on a cert there. The question that you may need to look at was, is that a meaningful assert? Don't know. Okay. So that was that one. So the other exciting thing I want to show you as well, I know I'm running over slightly. So every time that a user story is deployed, it creates 2 records. It creates a promotion and it creates a deployment. And this particular promotion was created when I tried to back promote user stories. So I've got a user story in UAT and I'm trying to push it into Dev3. And what it's saying is that I've got a what's called a merge conflict. And a merge conflict is basically saying that I've got 2 files. In this particular instance, I think it's Apex, and I want the user to be able to work out which is single source of the truth. You can get Copado to do this, but I've actually turned that off and just made it manual for both Apex classes and Apex triggers. So let's look at what this screen looks like. Okay, so as I say, I have the option to also resolve it, but let's look at resolve. Okay, so for those of you who have used Git, you may well see these when you do a Git compare, and you'll see the header file and you think, yeah, okay, what's the differences? Or you can see 2 panels. So this is my resolution branch. This is the one this is the one that I want to build, and this is my feature branch. But I think it was on the last release or the release before, Copado introduced a 3-panel one, where what I can now do is my resolution file, i.e. the one that's going to be promoted, can be a mixture of both the promotion branch one and the feature branch one. So I say I can do all of this. I don't need to do anything. I don't need to know about Git. I haven't gone into Git. The user story that talked about configuration, that person created that might be an admin and they wouldn't know about Git. But I can do all of this resolve all of my conflicts within the tool itself. I don't need to go outside the tool. Okay, so let me just speed up a little bit. Right, so I mentioned about data. So what Copado has is it has something called the Advanced Data Deployer, which I think has just been renamed today to something else, which I can't remember. So my use case here is I want to create a new sandbox, and I want to be able to copy some accounts from production, and I want to be able to anonymize them. So what you do is to create what's called a data template. I've called it anonymize accounts, funny enough. On my object fields, these are the fields actually on the account object. I have chosen, because I don't want actual physical, this is production data, I'm just pushing this into a dev box. I've scrambled the account name, and I've also scrambled the annual revenue. I don't particularly want that going across to dev. They just need the accounts to test with, okay? In terms of what happens then, right, hang on, hopefully this will work. I won't show you this live because it does take a few minutes, but this is what's called a data deployment, and you can see that I physically deployed 6 accounts from prod to dev 3 successfully. I can show you this account, but I'd be assured that they are there, and I did check earlier. One other thing, and again, it probably answers one of the questions. So let me go in there. So there's a couple of things. I've created a very, very simple use case about sandbox seeding and moving accounts, but Copado can do a whole lot more. If you're a user of Salesforce CPQ, that template consists of the whole CPQ data model that you can actually, so they're pre-created data templates that you can move for your data. Same thing with Ngino. I think somebody asked about what are the integrations. You've got an agile integration to Jira for free, so you can download that. And I think that is the end of the CodeScan Copado demo. So hopefully that was fun. Who's next?
Ben, do you want to dive in a bit more and show us CodeScan at scale? And
yeah, love to.
Yeah, unpresent, Martin.
Okay.
So. Can you hear me okay? Someone said before
looking
that
great.
Was a little quiet.
Look good, sound good.
So, apologies, it's 2:30 in the morning here in Australia. So, try to be on the ball, but anyway, so CodeScan, as Martin showed us, is a code quality tool. And I'm just going to take a few steps back to where, I guess, where you'd start to use CodeScan. So as a developer, a lot of developers work in Visual Studio. So, so while you're working, you can get CodeScan to immediately show issues with your code. So, for example, if I create an unused variable and I save it, it immediately shows me that this variable here is unused, and it checks for I think over 300 types of different types of rules. So, like different types of problems, from security issues to code quality things like unused and unnecessary code and things like that. So, so the developer here, once they've committed their code to Git, and typically we've run some sort of CI/CD tool like Copado, which works really well. Or we have our you can connect directly into Git or Salesforce, pull the data directly from Salesforce metadata. The next step you have is you get all your data pulled into CodeScan. We have this is our cloud version here. So here we have all of the projects that have been run on CodeScan, and so you can see here we've got two different projects. In this case, one of them is hooked up to GitHub, and the other one I think is hooked up directly to Salesforce. And Copado would integration will look exactly the same. So this is sort of your portfolio view, and you can actually see and drill down. You can see, okay, here's some of the projects that are passing. Here's some. We can click here and just see only my projects that are failing. And this is this quality of quality gates, this concept of quality gates that Martin was talking about, which I'll show you in a bit more depth soon. So the first thing that springs to mind is okay, what rules are we going to run? So the rules that you're going to run is called a quality profile, and of course that's completely configurable. So so here we go into our quality profile for Apex, the Apex language. So you can see here we have various languages that we can use, JavaScript of course, and Apex and Visual Force, and we've also got some new metadata rules that you can also run. So in this quality profile, we can assign it to be used in our projects and activate or deactivate certain rules. So we got all of these here, and let's have a look at, for example, a long variable name is a rule that checks that you don't use really long variable names. And if I was to activate that, I can set the severity of that. Severity is important for determining certain workflow rules in the quality gates, which I'll show you in a second. And you can also set whether what the minimum is for what is considered a long variable name. Okay, so this is, now we've gone inside of one of those projects, and this is what it looks like. So we can see here we've got all of the issues that we have that is in the result of the scan. So we've got bugs, security vulnerabilities, and what we strangely refer to code smells, which basically is any piece of code that smells. We can also see the code coverage, if that's available, and code duplication. That's another very important aspect of your code, of keeping clean code. It's not duplicating it. So we can drill down into the issues, and we can actually we can take every issue can be reassigned. We can mark it as a false positive. We can assign it to members in the team, and we can put comments on it, so on and so forth. We can also drill down into it, see where the issue was. I think that was the same actually. If we remember, if we flip back to this Visual Studio screen, it's the exact same results. And actually, it's not exactly the same, but I'll explain what happened there. So basically, when you run this code, when you're running Visual Studio, you actually synchronize the quality profiles between the two tools. So you set up your quality profile in one place, and then those rules actually synchronize down to all of the Visual Studio plugins, and then you're using the exact same settings. So for that particular rule must have been configured differently for the Visual Studio. So yeah, yeah, so we can go through a few of these things. Security vulnerabilities looks like this match is coming from somewhere, which we're not checking where that come from. So that could be actually a socket injection type scenario.
Ben, a question that's come in a couple of times is about downloading or extracting the list of issues that have come from CodeScan.
Mm-hmm.
Martin listed one possibility with there's an npm package you can use to download it. I personally think this user interface where you're actually going through the code and checking things off is the best. But are there other options for exporting lists?
Yes, there are other options. There is a plugin to export to a CSV plugin. CSV list. We are working, I believe there's a new version of the SFDX plugin coming out that will allow that. That's hopefully going to come out in the next few weeks to do the same sort of thing. But yeah, you're right, Andrew. The interface is the best way of visualizing this. It can be a bit overwhelming when you've got a lot of rules and being able to see the details of the rule here. You can see all the information about every rule. You can in many cases you can click on the rule and it will tell you where that data is coming from. You can click here and you follow through the code and so on and so forth. And that's a powerful feature that if you export it, you're just going to miss out on. So.
Yeah, I've been asked before for that many times, and it was primarily somebody who wanted to splice and dice the data that they couldn't do on the main dashboard. But I totally agree that dashboard is where you want to stay, assigning issues and stuff. I'm just looking at time because we've only got 12 more minutes. Should we zip over to DevOps 360?
Okay. Basically, these tools together, they're just super powerful. Like, yeah, I work for Copado now, but even before I worked for Copado, I was a massive fan of CodeScan, and the interface that you've got here, what Ben is showing. Also, Ben, if you just want to show that high-level view where you can see like all of your projects and the scores and so forth. This is super powerful from my point of view for like project managers, for executive leaders in the team, somebody like a company like PolSource where they're running tons of projects at any given time. Their leadership can see all of the project qualities. Martin, you said that you have one of your managers who wakes up early on Monday morning and looks at code quality. They're not necessarily even a coder, right? But they,
he isn't.
But he knows the difference between an A, B, C, and a D, right? And he knows. Careful, it's recorded. So he knows the difference between an upward trend and a downward trend. And like if you dive into the CodeScan demo here, Ben, just the dashboard you've got on here, like this bubble chart view, it's just such a rich source of information about all of the code that's going on. Architectural issues that are trending up, trending down, whatever that bubble is in the upper right-hand corner, somebody needs to look at that thing because that's going to be a nightmare, right? That's a maintenance nightmare. And so the team from CodeScan's really put an enormous amount of energy into writing rules that are, wisely chosen for Salesforce development. There was a question that came in earlier about what's the difference between this and just basic SonarQube. If people do recognize this is the SonarQube interface, it's the rule engine. So you can use CodeScan for non-Salesforce languages as well, right? It's
yes.
But
just to point out, we do the Visualforce and JavaScript. Actually, we also do inline JavaScript. It's probably something that not a lot of people know about. We actually extract the JavaScript out of Visualforce. We also can run that.
It also looks at the CSS as well.
CSS, yep.
So just sort of backing up the high-level context, Martin is kind of an expert at all of this stuff, and folks at PolSource have expertise across all of these tools. But it's the point of having these. They're all more powerful together, right? Like Martin was saying earlier about that thing about does this replace your architect? Absolutely it doesn't. It just puts tiny robots in place to do all of the boring work, the repetitive work, so the architects can focus on high value stuff. And this is where, an organization like PolSource, or your own organization, if you get Copado and CodeScan embedded, they basically help you to take care of a massive class of repetitive quality issues, and they basically save a ton of time in terms of preparing for releases, and free your people up to do high value work of building new stuff on Salesforce, addressing more sophisticated quality issues. Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's also this concept of policing the policeman, right? I'm a developer. I develop a lot. Who's going to dare check me? Well, I actually cannot work without a code analysis tool. I have to have one, because I know I'm rubbish at remembering to do those simple things. I know the high level stuff, but sometimes you just forget the low level stuff. And this is like the policeman or the spell checker of my code. I just can't work without it, without going, hang on, did I do that right? I get this niggly feeling. But it's like it's not, and having a, like you say, like a robot telling you, it doesn't feel that bad. If your boss tells you that you're doing a bad job, somehow you feel, just doesn't feel real good. And having it automatically done, it works a lot better.
And if you go back to VS Code is my favorite user interface for showing these CodeScan rules. It's basically like spell check. Somebody like Stephen King, best writer in the world, right? He still uses spell check, right? Why is that not beneficial? So Ben, if you stop sharing, I'm going to just share my screen to give you all some hot off the press breaking content from Copado. So today, July 15th, there's a lot going on, a lot of webinars and so forth. We also have released Copado's Summer 20 release, which includes DevOps 360, which is a new comprehensive analytics package. As you can tell already, I'm excited about analytics and metrics, but it's not just because it's not that I'm a data geek as such, it's that we need insights. We need better insights as development teams and Salesforce teams. What you're seeing here is what's called a value stream map view. It may be a little bit unfamiliar to people, but the stages of planning, building, testing, and releasing is a pretty generic set of stages to describe what's happening. What you're seeing here are the stages of the development process, but what you're seeing are metrics on the stages of the development process. So if you take those Copado user stories, you run them through this whole release process, how can you answer the question, how long does it typically take for something to go through the planning stage, for a typical user story? How long does it typically take for something to go through the development phase, for the testing phase? How long are things waiting before they get picked up by the developers? How often are things sent back to previous stages? How much work do we currently have in progress in each of the different stages? This is the information that value stream maps give you. And so over time, what you get is a very, very rich set of information about the life cycle of your work. It's like something's following every piece of work through the whole process. And doing analytics on that. What we also have is detailed analytics, for example, looking at all of the code files that you're changing over time. So for example, I can see for bugs, how many user story items, how many metadata items are associated with bugs? Are they code items that are associated with bugs? Mostly, I can zoom in and see specific items, which classes were being changed for over a period of time. I can filter and so forth. You can look at planning dashboards over time to see how much work was done at different sprints, burn up charts and so forth. All of these advanced analytics tools are all part of Copado DevOps 360. So these are not Salesforce standard reports and dashboards. These are advanced dashboards, very interactive, highly interactive dashboards where you can filter and see an enormous amount of information about your whole system. So I just wanted to give that visual.
I was just going to ask, some of the research that we did on bugs and when you solve them, there's a big difference when you solve them at build time versus test and UAT time. I'm not sure if your Dev 360 would show that, but that was something. Yeah. So using, for example, the VS Code, like I was saying before, having the developer fix a bug or a security problem right at the beginning of that process is going to have an enormous time impact, as opposed to waiting until it's in UAT or even in production. You remember those days when a bug occurs in production and the entire company is jumping up and down. Think of the man hours that's involved in something like that. And sometimes it's literally one line of code, which sometimes CodeScan will even pick up. But yeah, bringing that. I don't know if it's yeah.
So it does track how many items have to be sent back from testing to development, or from UAT to development.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I went through the two modules today, and so yeah, it's awesome. It's I could really see that being beneficial to a lot of companies. We've only got 3 minutes left, so I know we've overrun, but I think it was important to show some of that stuff. So let me just share screen again where we've left off. Oops, no, I don't want to leave meeting. Yeah. So just to say that DevOps, it's not throw your release over the line. It's a continuous feedback loop, and you've got collaboration through all the team, from the CIO, the architect, your admin, your security, and your developers, through your build and your build, test, and deploy scenarios. So again, reading Andrew's book, it's based on theory that is probably 50 years old, that came from Toyota Motor Group, wasn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, Toyota is the...
Yeah. So really interesting theory behind all of this as well. So cool. Let me just scoot past that one as well. I've just given you an idea of what a DevOps process could look like that's in place, where you have multiple work streams and you have an operations team that's deploying it, but they're all using a single DevOps solution. And what
Martin, just in the interest of time, do you want to just point people to how they can find out more about PolSource and the True North offering? You guys are... Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So, what do we offer? So, True North package. So, what it is? So, we offer a couple of packages, but essentially, what we will do is to analyze your org, primarily using CodeScan, but obviously we can do some manual checks in there as well. And the idea is to show you what your state of technical debt is. We've done many of these over the years, so some are not too bad. Some orgs that are older tend to have huge amounts of technical debt, which comes as a bit of a surprise to the company. Why do you want to do it? Why do you want to release your technical debt? It will enable you to run more agile. If you've got a easier code base to manage, any new functionality coming in, it's going to be easier to put in. You're going to have less issues. It's easier to read, etc. So yeah, that comes with a free. That comes with a 30-minute assessment. With that, you get to call, have a chat with one of our DevOps experts who would actually understand how you're currently deploying, where your pain points are, what potential changes that could be made to actually improve matters. And I always remember one of the guys I work with Copado is a really good mate of mine, Phil. Copado is there to make release days fun, right? I didn't understand what he meant when he said that a couple of years ago, but I understand now, because up until that point, release days for me were never fun. I think that's it.
Yeah, the words fun and release days are almost never associated together, but seriously, when you get these kinds of tools into place and they're sort of handling all of the boring, miserable stuff, these tools have been built by people like Ben, you know, and others who really care about this process and want to make sure that all of the miserable parts of Salesforce development are automated.
Yeah, I think it's they really understand what the issues are. That I think that's the key thing, that, you know, that's why, you know, we're in partnership with both Copado and CodeScan, because they are, if you know, they, as far as I'm concerned, they're the best tools out there for doing this.
Awesome. Great to be with everybody. Thank you all so much for your interest, for all the questions. I know we didn't quite get to everything, but hit PolSource up if you have further follow-on questions. So,
okay.
Thanks, Ben, for waking up at 2 a.m., for being up at 2 a.m. for us.
Cheers, Ben. Cheers, Andrew.
Thanks all.
Okay, thank you. Bye.